those of us that stand to benefit from change vastly outnumber those that benefit from the status quo. We know that the status quo is not working for the majority of us. So that's why it's really important for us to act together and to act with hope and with resolve to change the world for the better.
Welcome to Activists Make History. My name is Peggy Nash. I've been a union activist, a feminist advocate, and for nearly a decade, a member of Parliament in Canada's House of Commons. I know what it's like to start from scratch, against the odds, in building a community campaign or running for political office. Our lives are hugely affected by political decisions, but for the underrepresented in political life, Canadian politics can seem like a secret society designed to shut them out. I'm here with a special series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, to lift the curtain on these electoral mysteries and show the underdogs how we can do it. In Activists Make History, I talk to activists, experts, political leaders, and those like me who've been there and done that, to show you can make real progressive change in how Canadian democracy functions so that we can win a better world through elected office. Atiya Jaffar is the Canada Campaigns Manager at 350.org, where she leads climate justice mobilizations and cross-movement organizing. Based in Vancouver, she works at the intersection of climate, Indigenous, migrant, and economic justice movements. She's a longtime activist and digital campaigner. In September 2025, she led the national coordination of the Draw the Line protests, while also joining the Vancouver protest that brought together hundreds of climate and social justice advocates under a united banner for systemic change. Atiya, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Just to start off, 350 Canada is one of the leading young activist organizations in Canada around climate movement. What got you involved in the whole issue of climate and social justice? What drew you to those two strands?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined climate organizing actually through my Campus 350 group when I was in undergrad. And what drove me was just being an immigrant from Pakistan. And while I was in my undergrad, there were some major climate disasters that happened in my homelands in Pakistan. And for me, it was really eye-opening to start connecting the dots between those disasters, which were truly, truly awful. Many people were displaced. And, there was massive flooding that happened in 2010, for example, which at the time the UN called the worst humanitarian disaster in history. But over time, through my university education, through the courses I was taking, I started to connect the dots between what was happening in that part of the world with what we're seeing through climate change and the extraction of fossil fuels. And so UBC 350 was the first group that I saw that was actually doing something about it. We were engaging around the pipeline fights and supporting Indigenous land defenders in the fight against pipelines that were going to expand fossil fuel expansion and drive more climate disasters. And eventually that turned into working on fossil fuel divestment, which was a global movement to call on universities and institutions to divest from fossil fuels. And that was my entry point. And I ended up also then working at 350, which is where I still work. And it's been such a journey so far.
So do you mind if I ask, what did you study at UBC?
Yeah, I studied environmental studies through kind of more of an interdisciplinary lens. So it was looking at the science side, but also the people side of it as well. How the environment impacts people and how people impact the environment. But then also thinking through like the scientific processes at play for things like climate change and for ecological degradation and that kind of thing.
So clearly you were already concerned about the environment because you went into environmental studies. What do you think prompted you to make that your priority?
I think when you learn about things in the classroom, or even when you read about things, you kind of read about it in a matter-of-fact way. This is happening, these are bad things. And it's always really overwhelming when you're learning about things that are really disastrous for the future of humanity, and you just don't know what to do in response. It makes you feel so powerless. So things like fossil fuel divestment and the pipeline fights, they allowed me to feel my power as an individual, as a community, as a movement. And that's really what drew me to the social movements. And I think, I realized I was going to university during the Harper era. And for me, it was like, oh, wow, like all these solutions, they exist, all these policies, they exist, but they're not being implemented. So really what's missing is the people power piece to fight for what we know is possible. And that's what brought me to a lot of the grassroots struggles that I'm involved with now. And I think through learning from Indigenous land defenders and others, I learned about all these intersecting issues as well and how they're connected to the fight for climate justice.
BC is kind of at the center of that mobilization. And, it takes something for someone to read about challenges, but then to make that transition to say, no, I'm going to intervene, I'm going to act. Have you always been an activist, or what prompted you to say, no, I'm going to try to work for a solution?
No, I don't think I considered myself an activist. I think I considered myself to be curious about the world. And I think, as a lot of us are, when we start thinking about the world, we start thinking about the individual actions that we can take. So when I was younger, I was like really involved with the recycling club at school and things like that. That just felt like very much focused on individual actions. So for me, it was really mind-boggling to be presented with the concept that I could be a political agent, that little old me in my little neighborhood, I have any power to change structures, change these massive structures that are actually the ones that are at fault. It's not necessarily about people as individuals riding their bikes more or recycling more, even though those are all good things that people should do. It's really about changing the structures. And we all have agency as, citizens, as just informed individuals. We have the ability to mobilize. We have the ability to really call into question these power structures at play that are causing these many disasters.
Yeah. So if not you, who, right?
Yeah,
everybody has a role. Now, 350 Canada and the Draw the Line mobilization, I mean, that was impressive. It was a mobilization right across the country. Can you tell us a bit about how many cities were involved, how many people, and what was the focus of the campaign?
Yes, totally. So with Draw the Line, we were really focused on addressing this agenda that you've named with the Carney government, really going in the opposite direction that we would want them to, serving essentially corporations, billionaires, big oil, while undermining things like social services. They're instead, bringing forward an austerity agenda and promoting increased military budgets. They're backing big oil with new policies that undermine many environmental laws and also
talking about building a new pipeline.
We're talking about building several new pipelines. Yes, exactly. All this fossil fuel infrastructure that we had successfully fought as a movement, they're talking about reviving it. So in light of all of this and recognizing that it seems like our enemies are actually very well coordinated when it comes to pushing the government to push their agenda forward, we realized we also as social justice movements need to come together and send a unified message for justice. That means, realizing that if we are fighting these fights in a fractured way, it doesn't serve any of us. So we decided to come together across movements to send a really, really powerful message, basically right as soon as Parliament resumed this September. And the goal was to send a clear message that we're drawing the line for people, peace, and the planet. And we set a really clear set of demands that basically asked the Carney government to stop funding climate chaos, genocide, extraction, and instead fund the things that we really need, like social services, to support Indigenous rights and Indigenous sovereignty projects, to support, the climate solutions that we all know are possible and that are really viable alternatives to pipelines. So it was a unified message to stand up against all of the bad things, but also to support the solutions that we know are possible, that support people and the planet.
Now, it seems that you brought together a number of diverse organizations with different, maybe each one has a slightly different focus, maybe similar values. How did you build solidarity concretely? Because that's no small thing to do.
It's very difficult. It's difficult to bring together so many different organizations. We had a group of about 10 organizations that were coming together in the national coordination team, which was, organizations that represented each of the different demands that we were pushing forward. We also had over 350 organizations from across the country sign on to endorse Draw the Line. And in the end, we were able to mobilize in over 70 communities. We were able to mobilize over 22,000 people. It was really incredible incredible. And like you said, it's no easy feat to bring everyone together at the same table. It required time to slow down and it really make sure that we were aligned around why the problems are all connected and therefore why the solutions must be connected as well. It required all of the representatives coming to the table to then go back to their organizations and talk to their people about how these connections need to be made across our movements. We hosted a webinar that was more of a public education piece where we had movement leaders from across movements come together to talk about, the historic nature of all of these struggles and how our struggles are connected and how we're stronger when we stand together. On the 350 side, to really bring people along and have them understand various pieces. For example, the migrant rights piece as well with Bill C2 that had recently been proposed by the Carney government. We held these teach-ins. There were teach-ins to bring together people from our base, which is a climate movement, to learn about, these really horrible policy pieces like Bill C5 that Carney's brought forward that would be really damaging for climate action. But then we also educated about things like Bill C2 and why we absolutely need to ensure that there's migrant rights, measures for migrant rights, and we're not actually going backwards when it comes to ensuring that we're valuing people as human beings and how that's connected to the climate action struggle. So that was really important. There was a lot of movement education needed. I think there was a lot of relationship building that needed to happen, and we were moving pretty quickly, but it was important to also make sure that we were building trust with people across movements and finding the shared language to talk to each other, because sometimes people are in their own silo and they only have the language to talk to their particular organizing crew, but to be able to share information, share analyses across movements was a really it was a really exciting process, and it was really challenging at times, and there were moments that I think were difficult for everyone, but ultimately I think it was really worth it because we were able to send such a powerful and united message.
Yeah, building solidarity can be challenging. And as you said, you sometimes need to slow down a bit to build those relationships. Can you tell us a bit, maybe some examples that stand out in your mind? Were there situations when you're dealing with a group that maybe wasn't focused on climate justice, and suddenly there was an aha moment where you can make that connection and people realize, oh, wait a minute, my fight for justice for migrant workers is connected to Indigenous workers, and Indigenous communities is connected to climate change. They're, as you say, they are silos potentially. So building solidarity can be challenging. Was there a moment that stands out to you where really a light went on with someone?
Yeah, I think a lot of those, there were so many moments like that. And I think so many of those moments were happening at the local level. So a lot of what I was doing was focusing on the national piece of bringing people together. But I was also really involved with the Vancouver organizing as well that happened at a local level. For me, I think one of the things that, one of the goals that we had was to build stronger connections between labor and climate specifically, because those are two groups that have actually really connected fights, but there's often not enough opportunity to get to know each other. And it was actually really beautiful to see for the first time at our Vancouver Coalition meetings that all of these climate organizers were meeting all of these labor leaders and local organizers for the first time, and building those connections and having those conversations. And it just so happened that the president of QP National, Mark Hancock, was in Vancouver on Draw the Line Action Day on September 20th. So he ended up also speaking to everyone and kicking off the march that happened here in Vancouver, which was really beautiful. And I think he sent a really strong unified message about how we need to stand together in this moment of, rising fascism, austerity, of corporations and billionaires essentially trying to win their wish list with the Carney government. Mark Hancock spoke right after we had a welcome by an Indigenous wisdom holder, Shane Point, here as well. And it was really beautiful to kind of see Shane and Mark Hancock also come onto the stage together. Right after they both spoke, they also hugged. And it was really a beautiful message that was being sent to folks who were gathering from across movements, that we are united in this struggle. And there were also, like I said, opportunities for learning that were created. So we had some art builds where we also, during the art build, world held different learning circles to learn about different issues. So we had an art build where we were painting banners, but as we were painting banners, we huddled to learn about Bill C2 and what it meant. And, that huddle was extremely full. So many people joined in because they were just very confused. They felt like this was just a piece of legislation that was being rushed ahead without many people understanding its implications for migrant rights, and not just for migrants, but also for all of us, because there are some huge pieces in there that would violate the rights of every person in so-called Canada. So it was really great to see, folks from climate justice groups, from Palestine Solidarity Organizing, from various different groups, kind of sit together and listen to the migrant rights organizers locally to hear them speak directly about Bill C2 and its implications. And similarly, we had a learning circle about Palestine solidarity, and a lot of people from the climate movement joined that one to learn a little bit more about that, to learn about the history of that Palestine solidarity struggle as well. So those are some examples of, for me, seeing all my worlds come together was really beautiful. And I think for others as well, seeing these relationships being built and also these moments of learning happening, across our organizing time was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds very powerful, thinking about the leader of the largest union in the country, standing side by side with Indigenous leaders, climate justice leaders. That sends a powerful message to the broader community, but specifically to those union members who see their leader showing that example. Paint me a picture, if you can, of what the actual day was like in terms of the number of people and what happened. There were speakers. Was there a march in Vancouver? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, it was really beautiful. For me, I was up at 7 a.m. because I was also trying to pay attention to all the other actions that were happening across the country. So it was really beautiful to kind of wake up knowing that, the Ottawa action is underway now, and they're starting to paint a mural really like right outside the Prime Minister's office. Like, it was so beautiful to kind of see all of these things coming together, even so early on in my day, because Pacific time is so behind everyone else. Then, of course, to go from being on my computer and looking at all the photos rolling in from St. John's, from Kingston, from Toronto, from Ottawa, to then go to the streets was really, really beautiful. Like I said, in Vancouver, we had an opening by Shane Point, which was really beautiful to ground us in how decolonization is at the root of all of our struggles, especially as we stand on these stolen lands. And to go from that to hearing from Mark Hancock, who had such a powerful message about, just don't let them tell you that we're powerless, because we're not. We can see that we have the numbers. We can change the outcomes of what's possible. So that was a really powerful message to receive. And after that, we embarked on a march. There was a banner drop that happened to send a clear message about drawing the line, and then we ended with a rally and a gathering at a park outside of Science World, for those who know Vancouver. And at that gathering, we heard from speakers from across the 5 demands. So movement leaders from the climate justice movement, from the migrant rights movement, from the Palestine solidarity movement and anti-war movement, from the Indigenous rights fights, and also from the fights for better social services and public spending. So we had movement leaders speak on each of these demands, which was really, really beautiful. And we also had some performers take the stage to bring in some art and some music as well. And there was an information fair with different groups putting up their tents and sharing information about different things that they were organizing in the city. It was really, really beautiful to see. I think for me, it was incredible to see kind of just like, the next day I went to my son's soccer class, and to hear his soccer coach was in the audience, and she was just like crying the whole time, because it was just so beautiful for her to see these messages from inspiring movement leaders that we often, only see on social media. It's so rare that people get to actually hear from everyone in one space. And it's so powerful to hear those words in one space. So yeah, that was what it was like in Vancouver. We were estimating we had about 5,000 people on the streets in Vancouver, which was really, really incredible.
There is something to be said for showing up in person. Social media can be a powerful connector, but there's something to be said for showing up in person that conveys a message of determination. And, you said earlier that the Carney government is moving in the opposite direction: pipelines, austerity, deregulation, big defense spending. And I don't think the agenda is totally set. I mean, we'll see what the budget holds, but I'm sure there is debate in the Liberal Party about which direction they're going in, and that's interesting. But tell me what kind of impact you think this action, this day of action, can have in influencing a government, and maybe short term and long term, because sometimes, I mean, their budget's already in the can, I'm sure, and they know which direction they're going in. But what impact do you think you'll have?
Do you mean the impact we'll have nationally with Draw the Line?
Yeah, I'm wondering, this takes an incredible mobilization, and it's very enriching on an interpersonal level where people grow, they learn. The synergy of groups coming together, I think, is very powerful. Yet we have a government that says, well, maybe we should build more pipelines, or, the solution is we have to invest more in defense. And that can be demoralizing, but you don't seem like the kind of person who gets discouraged or demoralized very easily. So maybe you could just describe for a moment how you think the demonstrations impact on the federal government. And I'm sure you're in this for the long haul. So what is the plan?
Well, I think just to go back to the piece about impact, it's really important to recognize in this moment that, I said this before, our enemies are coordinated. They are united. They are asking for what they want. They are putting forward their wish list, and they're winning them. I feel like even just what we've seen in the last couple of months with the early actions of the Carney government, I keep bringing back Bill C-5 because it's just an example of those things. That it's like, it is to me mind-boggling that this legislation that undermines 13 environmental protection laws and vehemently violates Indigenous rights is even on the table. But it is on the table because, big oil, mega corporations, they have lobbied successfully for it in a very coordinated way.
And they're trying to take advantage of a crisis, right? And it's the same solutions they've been peddling for 40 years, but they think they can push it forward in a crisis.
They're repackaging their agenda with, Trump as basically the tagline of why this is needed in this moment. But, we know, in fact, factually, that building new pipelines, for example, putting forward legislation like Bill C-5 doesn't actually build more resilience to Trump and to any threats coming from the US, just in the same way that increased military spending, which would actually then bring more money to American weapons companies, doesn't actually build resilience either. But Trump is again being used as an excuse to peddle this really dangerous agenda that promotes austerity, that promotes increased military spending, that promotes new pipelines. So we need to react in a way that brings us together to essentially counteract this coordinated effort from our enemies, from the right, from mega corporations, from people that would profit off of these various crises that we're seeing at our expense. And we know that there are better solutions that are possible. We know that actually building things like an east-west power grid would build more resilience, would actually free us from many of our ties to the US, because our current electricity infrastructure is made to prioritize north-south connections to the US over east-west connections across provinces and territories. We know that this would allow people everywhere to access the cleanest and cheapest form of electricity on Earth, which is renewable energy. And these kinds of solutions are ones that we need to be talking openly about, and we need to telling a powerful story about to bring more people in. So I think that's the most important thing, is building movements that are telling a strong story and that are bringing in the public and mobilizing the public in support for what we want. The reason that all of these horrible things that Carney is pushing are able to move forward is because he is manufacturing consent for them by claiming that they're a response to a perceived threat, which we know is not true, but people are buying that story because there is extreme anxiety right now about our future, the future of our planet, the future of our economy, the future of our families. And just right before our eyes, that anxiety is being exploited to serve the interests of people and companies that do not have our best interests in mind. So it's really important for us to, as social movements, as people that are involved and politically active, to think about how we push for the solutions we need, and how we also tell a story that brings in new people and grows our movement. And I think that's very possible. We've done it before. We've been told that pipelines are inevitable. We need pipelines to prosper, and yet we've fought pipelines successfully over and over again. And we know that we have this muscle. We know how we have this ability. We know the truth is on our side. So I think it's really a matter of telling that story of bringing people in and growing our movements. And when people are leading with their truth, when they're mobilizing in support of issues, politicians follow, because ultimately politicians are not the real leader. People are the real leaders. And so if we are paving the way forward, if we're showing them the direction that the public is headed in, inevitably they will follow us as well.
Mm-hmm. So that was not just a one day of action. Clearly, you're continuing, and the goal is to create public pressure so the governments will follow. And you're right. I mean, I've been an elected representative. You want to get reelected, people have to vote for you. Hopefully, you're also sticking with your principles, but that can be flexible, I've seen sometimes with some people. But what actions are you involved in now? What's 350.org doing in terms of next events?
Absolutely. So right after Draw the Line, just a few days following it, we were on Parliament Hill with other organizations, including Sacred Earth, which is an incredible organization led by Indigenous women that's promoting renewable energy, and in particular, Indigenous-led renewable energy. So we were on Parliament Hill with Sacred Earth and with organizations like David Suzuki Foundation, and we were working on a coordinated effort to push politicians to support a people's power grid. So to support the East-West grid that we know is much needed to displace not just our dependence on fossil fuels, but also our dependence on having our electricity infrastructure connected to the United States, and to ensure that people across the country have access to cheap, reliable, renewable electricity. So that was just right on the heels of Draw the Line, to make sure that our message was delivered, and really, really clearly to parliamentary leaders, to ensure that it was on the agenda, especially leading up to this major moment that's coming up with the budget in early November. We know that Carney is going to table his first budget, and we want to make sure that true solutions are centered. And in doing so, we're also counteracting this narrative that we need new pipelines, that we need new fossil fuel infrastructure, which currently seems to be the direction that this government is headed in. But we also know that because our struggles are connected, there's a really important moment to push across movements for the solutions we need. So right now, we've also been supportive of our friends at Lead Now that are taking on a campaign for housing for all. So they're pushing for, affordable housing for everyone, which is something that Carney had also promised. And now we hear again that, he's bringing corporate landlords to the table instead of everyday people that are suffering from the housing crisis. So that is a really wonderful campaign that we have supported Lead Now with. We are also going to be working with our friends at the Migrant Rights Network in their fight against legislation that undermines the rights of migrants, including migrant workers that are critical to our food systems, that are critical to our care systems here in
Especially
Canada.
in BC, there's a large community that basically helps feed us.
Absolutely. And Bill C2, which was one of the first bills that Carney introduced, would actually just make it impossible for people to receive, actual permanent residency status, and it would make it possible to unleash new mass deportations, similar to how Trump is deporting people down south. And now the bill is being repackaged as Bill C12, but it includes the same really terrible things that we saw in Bill C2. So we are ensuring that we're staying connected to our friends at Migrant Rights Network to have a coordinated effort to oppose this bill, because it's really, really damaging for, basic human rights. And it's also something that threatens all of us, because it would also give, these mega tech corporations access to our personal data from social media websites without a warrant. So there's a lot
of wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just give them more power, as if they don't have enough information about us. Like, it's just very, very scary. So it's important for us to make sure that we're coordinating across movements to send a powerful message and mobilizing against these horrible pieces of legislation.
So with President Trump, with people feeling like, well, you can't do anything, he's just moving ahead. And you are clearly a person of action. So what motivates you right now? What gives you hope in continuing the mobilization work that you're doing?
I think it's just looking to people that have come that have led fights before the ones that we're fighting right now. I know that there are so many people that have persevered in their fights. Our ancestors, people that have fought major colonizing powers, people that have fought for things like basic rights for women, for things like for basic labor laws, to create things like weekends for us. It's like these fights that seemed insurmountable in the past. People persevered, and we can enjoy much of what we can enjoy today because those before us that fought for many of these things. And we know that politicians didn't hand over a lot of these regulations or these basic human rights measures. They were all fought for. So it's important to recognize that when we look behind us, we see a legacy of injustices, but we also see a legacy of people fighting back and fighting for more and fighting for better. And there have been really, really critical wins, even just, during my time at 350, we've successfully fought so many pipelines. We've fought major, fossil fuel extraction projects. We've won climate action legislation, and it's never enough. But we can see that when we act together, when we mobilize together, we can make a difference. And it's important to persevere. And it's so important. I mean, when we look at Gaza right now, and we see people that have faced 2 years of genocide, and yet they're still getting up every single day. They're still, supporting their communities as best as they can. They're still documenting the genocide of their people. All of this, these are acts of resistance, but they're also acts of hope, because it's a hope that there will be a better future out there. There's a hope that things can change, and things must change, because this is not an acceptable path that we're on, nationally or globally, and we have to fight back against it, because ultimately, I think those of us that stand to benefit from change vastly outnumber those that benefit from the status quo. We know that the status quo is not working for the majority of us. So that's why it's really important for us to act together and to act with hope and with resolve to change the world for the better.
Yeah, so many things seem impossible until people fight for them, and then they happen. And, listening to you speak, social activism is such a hopeful activity. You have to believe in a better world and believe you can make a better world to stay engaged and to devote yourself to that kind of activism. I think what you have built so far is amazing. I think our country will be better for it. And I'm thinking about people who are listening to this podcast who say, hey, she makes a lot of sense. I want to get involved. How can someone get in touch with you or get involved with 350.org?
So that's really great. I would love for folks to get more involved. This is a movement of so many people and so many different organizations, as I mentioned, and I'm just one small part of it. And if you want to be more involved, if you're interested in Draw the Line, I do encourage you to go to drawtheline.world to see the story of what happened on September 20th, to see some of the beautiful photos from those actions, and to sign up to learn more, not just from 350, but from all of the other organizations that were involved with Draw the Line, because there's so much that still needs to be done, as we've discussed, and we need everyone in this fight. So please do join us at drawtheline.world. You can also go to 350.org/Canada if you'd like to learn more about climate justice campaigns nationally. And over there, you can also sign the petition to support a People's Power Grid, which is a collective campaign with 350.org and Sacred Earth. So really encourage folks to check out those web pages and to sign up to learn more. And we'll keep you posted about actions coming up.
Atiya Jaffar, you are an inspiration, and thank you for all your work to build a better world. I just have a feeling that you might be successful, which is pretty exciting.
Thank you. I hope so. There's so much at stake.
That was Atiya Jaffar, the Canada Campaigns Manager at 350.org. Activists Make History is a special podcast series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, a publication and production of the Broadbent Institute. This show could not have been made possible without the generous contribution of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. If you'd like to hear more from Activists Make History, share and subscribe to Perspectives Journal on all major podcast platforms, as well as Press Progress's Sources podcast that digs deeper into the news stories you won't find in the major papers. The Perspectives Journal podcast and Sources are proud members of the Harbinger Media Network, Canada's progressive podcast community. Once again, I'm Peggy Nash, your host for Activists Make History and proud member of the Broadbent Institute's Board of Directors. You can read my latest book, Women Winning Office, An Activist Guide to Getting Elected, from Between the Lines Books.